Today I have a very exciting and interesting topic that I've been looking forward to making a video about. It is going to be about the book, The Faithful Executioner. The Faithful Executioner is a book by Joel F. Harrington. It's about a man who was forced into his profession of brutality passed down by his father. So he did not elect to be in this profession at all, but nonetheless he carried through with it, carrying out approximately 300 or so executions within his lifetime. It's a very interesting book that goes into the morality of his profession. Before we begin, I just want to say that I'm not an expert on this topic by any means. The book cites many sources, and I'm not here to verify all the claims made in the book, but to instead tell a story that I believe to be more or less true in its content. So without further ado, let's begin. Chapter 1, Coercion and Inheritance, the Making of an Executioner. Franz Schmidt did not choose his profession, as previously stated. His father, Heinrich Schmidt, was compelled into becoming an executioner after being selected and effectively forced by a regional prince following a dispute. Sonia, editor here from the future. I have to refilm that whole 30-minute segment I did because the video footage got corrupted. I don't know what happened, but yeah, I'm in a new outfit now, so hello. So at the time, what we now call Germany was not a unified nation. It was actually a patchwork of territories, free imperial cities, and local rulers who held authority over criminal justice. When Heinrich was appointed, refusal was not a realistic option, and once appointed, the role followed through generations of the family. Executioners occupied something like a caste position. They were legally employed by cities, such as Nuremberg, paid by municipal authorities, and necessary for the functioning of the courts, yet they were socially isolated. They could not join guilds. They were often married only within other executioner families, and they were tolerated but not embraced. Franz grew up knowing that his family enforced the law, yet lived outside of its social protection. From childhood, he understood that his future was already decided. To understand Schmidt's life, we have to understand the city he also served, Nuremberg. In the 16th century, Nuremberg was prosperous and politically significant. It was the center of trade and craftsmanship. It had structured courts, written laws, and strong civic administration, but it was also unstable. The Protestant Reformation had fractured religious unity, plagues periodically devastated populations, and economic inequality grew as migration from rural areas increased. City councils worried constantly about vagrancy, theft, moral disorder, and social unrest. Crime was not viewed simply as an individual failure, it was seen as a threat to communal stability. Public punishment, therefore, was not just about the offender, it was about reassurance. Executions were staged in public spaces, they were demonstrations of authority, they signaled that order would be preserved. In this context, Schmidt was not simply a man carrying out violence, he was part of the city's mechanism for stability. Chapter 2: What Deserved Death? One of the most striking aspects of Schmidt's journal is in the range of crimes that resulted in execution. Today, in jurisdictions that still use the death penalty, it is typically reserved for aggravated murder. In 16th century Nuremberg, the threshold was much lower. Schmidt executed individuals for murder, armed robbery, repeat theft, property crimes, and especially when they were repeated, would result in death. Infanticide also appears frequently within his records, as unmarried women who concealed pregnancies and whose newborns died were often prosecuted and executed. In a society concerned with legitimacy and honor, such acts were treated as threats to moral order. There were also cases of arson, devastatingly in tight-built wooden cities, and periods when witchcraft accusations led to executions. When reading his journal consecutively, what becomes clear is that execution functioned less as a means for revenge or vengeance and more as a boundary of enforcement. The city was defining what could not be tolerated. Whereas before the 16th century, they were, I don't know how else to say it besides vengeance induced proceedings. And what I mean by that is an eye for an eye. If somebody's mother was killed, for example, then that person's mother could be killed or they themselves would be killed. Once again, not an expert on the subject, but that's just how it seems to me. Chapter 3: Torture as a Procedure. Modern readers often assume that torture in early modern Europe was chaotic or arbitrary, but in Schmidt's world, it was procedural. Judicial torture required authorization. Courts followed Roman canon legal traditions, as Nuremberg was still part of the Holy Roman Empire. If strong circumstantial evidence existed but no confession had been obtained, torture could still be used to secure one. Confession was considered the highest form of proof. Schmidt recorded these sessions in structured detail. Whether the accused confessed quickly, resisted, or fainted, this is perhaps one of the most unsettling aspects of his journal, because just to think of how modern day legal proceedings go, obviously, if a confession is done under circumstance where there is any kind of pressure, that would be deemed at least questionable. But back in the 16th century of Nuremberg, it was regular practice. It goes to show that this brutality was not impulsive, it was bureaucratic. What we see here is not lawlessness, but regulation. The state was not necessarily eliminating the violence that had been previously conducted with other legal proceedings, if you want to call it that. It was slowly organizing it through record keeping. Diving a little bit more into the procedural aspects of these executions, Schmidt did seem to care deeply about the precision of his work. In one recorded execution, his first strike during a beheading did not fully sever the condemned man's head. He was distressed by having done this. And for Schmidt, skill was not simply about professionality. Obviously, he wanted, well, not obviously, I can't speak for these people, but it seemed like he was very ashamed when he failed to behead this individual because he wanted to reduce his suffering. And I will also talk about this a little bit later on, but Schmidt acted in part as a doctor as well. So within his moral framework, a clean execution was considered the most humane. So obviously that detail doesn't absolve him. It just kind of reveals a man who was not simply somebody who took pride in his killings or did so without any sort of emotion, even though his journal entries are quite objective and sometimes lacking emotion. But that's just my personal judgment. Nonetheless, him showing a little bit of regret in the form of his executions shows that he understood that his role was technical and bound by standards, but he still knew that there was a right and wrong way to go about it. All right, I believe this is chapter 4, but now we're going to talk about the executioner as a healer and his legacy. Schmidt's role becomes more complex when we consider another dimension of his life. As previously mentioned, he did practice medicine. He was a medical practitioner. Executioners often developed anatomical knowledge through their work. Schmidt treated thousands of patients over his lifetime, from fracture wounds to general surface level wounds to even surgical conditions, which would more or less be along the lines of amputations. Citizens who would not publicly socialize with him would privately seek his medical help. So this is a kind of important and interesting note, as Even though he was essentially cast out of society and people were like, sir, get out of my tavern. I do not want to see you in these streets, in my streets. Get out of this area. Privately, a lot of these citizens would come to him for medical help. So these same hands that essentially carried out these executions would also come to repair. Getting a little bit more into honor, as this is a important aspect of the book, especially for Schmidt himself. Late in life, Schmidt did something unprecedented. He did something that no other executioner did before him. He had petitioned the city of Nuremberg to restore his family's honor. He didn't deny his actions. He argued that he had carried out his duties lawfully and faithfully. If dishonor attached to vice, that a man who served the court within its legal framework should not be considered morally corrupt, was his argument. The city agreed, and finally, after generations, his family was freed from the chain of having to become an executioner. I believe this moment signaled a shift in how the state viewed individual purity. It feels like they moved away from treating the law as something that should be conducted with religious undertones. It feels like they finally took a step towards a more modern and bureaucratic identity. Historians describe this period as one of state consolidation because violence didn't disappear randomly one day. There was still definitely a lot of religious undertones within how the state operated, but the executions became, I guess, more standardized is the best way to put it. Private vengeance and feud culture gradually gave way to court administered punishment. Legal codes expanded, record keeping intensified, and Schmidt's journal itself is evidence of this transformation. The careful documentation of crimes and punishments reflects this emerging bureaucratic mentality. The executioner was no longer merely a figure of ritual retribution, he was a part of the state. He was a state employee, kind of like how we see today with I don't I don't want to like take it so far as to make modern day comparisons, but you kind of see how people who still enforce the death penalty today are seen as just employees to the state. In conclusion, Franz Schmidt stood between two worlds, one that was grounded in spectacle and communal enforcement, and the other moving towards a more centralized and bureaucratic governance. His journals show violence being documented, regulated, and integrated into administrative systems, and studying him is not about moral approval or condemnation. In making this video, I'm completely neutral on the subject because I just don't feel one way or another. I think this book serves to understand how societies justify punishment, especially when you compare it to modern day. I mean, 400 or 500 years difference. It's pretty interesting to read this and see how we go about legal procedures then versus now. But I leave you with one thing, dear audience, a question about who has the authority to harm and on what grounds. Do you believe that the death penalty should be something that the state has the authority to put under law, or do you think it should just be eliminated altogether? If you made it this far into this video, first of all, thank you, because this is my first ever video and I know it's not the best quality. Please, please, please check out this book. Support the author. If you liked this video, I didn't go into all the details. Once again, I kind of skimmed through because I'm reading like 3 different books right now and I don't know, my little ADHD brain can't keep up because I got other things going on. But once again, thank you for watching and have a great day. Bye.